Malhotra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today and make a contribution to today's budget debate. It is fair to say that the headlines today haven't gone perhaps as the Chancellor might have planned. Spite van man, Tories break tax vow, Phil picks a pocket or two, rob the builder, white van man gets battered by budget, and that's just to name a few. It's a good example, Madam Deputy Speaker, of how when you do things in a hurry, you get things wrong. The Chancellor got it wrong yesterday, and if he takes anything away from the last 24 hours, it will be that he made the wrong choice at the wrong time and in the wrong way. That's why Labour, along with many on the government side, will be opposing this move on the increase in national insurance for the self-employed. This was a broken promise, and the Chancellor will rightly be in for a rocky ride. The Chancellor has used his first budget to continue tax giveaways, Madam Deputy Speaker, for those at the top, while hitting self-employed workers on low and middle earners for that £2 billion to fill his own black hole. The Association of Independent Professionals and Self-Employed described this tax hike as an additional burden upon individuals who are already subjected to costly, excessive bureaucracy. Anyone self-employed earning over $16,250 a year will have to pay more tax. A self-employed person earning $20,000 will, on current proposals, pay almost $100 more in NI from next year. And a self-employed person earning $30,000 will pay almost $300 more in national insurance from next year. Up to 8,000 small businesses or self-employed in my constituency could be affected by this change. And for a self-employed earner bringing up a family on around $25,000, that could be around £15 to £20 a month. That could be coming from paying for school trips or school uniforms or putting food on the table. So at the same time as inflation is going up and average wage growth is being revised down, this measure implemented in this way will lead to yet another squeeze on household incomes. The last thing we want to see, Madam Deputy Speaker, is families borrowing more just to make ends meet. The just about managing could well become the just about managing no longer. The self-employed are the engine of the UK economy, and twice I have had periods of self-employment myself, and I know the challenges that are faced. You don't have the backup and security of an employer to fund your pension, to pay for a training course, cover you with another member of staff if you're off sick, or provide statutory holiday pay. It's hard and it's stressful, alongside those rewards indeed of being independent and entrepreneurial. And because your income fluctuates, it can be harder to get a mortgage or indeed a rental agreement. So this should have been the chance for the government to show the self-employed that they were on their side. Indeed, the biggest difference in tax take between self-employment compared to employment lies in the 13.8% employer national insurance, not the NI, paid by individuals. If the government is serious about equalising tax treatment, it should also be focused on how it works in partnership with the self-employed to balance and share risks with those who are doing the right thing, part of the SME community that's the backbone of our economy, and bring forward any proposals after proper dialogue and consultation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to focus on a few other small points in my contribution today. The first is on productivity. Productivity growth is set to be revised down again, and that is even after the UK productivity gap widened last year to the worst levels since records began. After 7 years of Tory government, we still lag over 30% behind Germany and the US. As the Chancellor said at the time of the autumn statement, the productivity gap is well known, but it is shocking nevertheless. And why productivity is being revised down is not just about Brexit. It's a reflection of the government's strategy and investment records and its achievements and its lack of achievement in this regard rather than its recycled infrastructure plans. At some point, the government has to take responsibility for its poor record on this. They now have no one else to blame. One example, Madam Deputy Speaker, is their record on school buildings. When this government came to power, they stopped the Building Schools for the Future programme, and 2 schools in my constituency were affected. Now we see the outcome of the neglect of the government in favour of a blindly ideological pursuit of support for free schools and grammar schools almost exclusively. Reports last month showed the National Audit Office has calculated that £6.7 billion is needed to bring existing school buildings in England and Wales to a satisfactory standard. Ministers are choosing instead to give billions of pounds to fund new free schools while existing schools are crumbling into disrepair. Not my view, but the conclusion of the Whitehall spending watchdog. The chair of the Public Accounts Committee called for the money to be reassigned to and diverted to existing buildings, and said that this taxpayers' money could otherwise be used to fund much-needed improvements. Take a second challenge, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK is 54th out of 80 countries surveyed for 4G coverage, with levels lower than Bulgaria, Albania and Romania. This is the 5th time the government have announced its highly limited rollout of fibre broadband. And once the rollout is complete, only 7% of homes and businesses will have benefited. Madam Deputy Speaker, corporation tax cuts brought in by this budget and previous budgets, where the tax cuts will drop to 19% this year, 18% next year and 17% the year after, are taking £15 billion out of public finances in this Parliament. That's a direct cost to the taxpayer. And the irony is that there isn't a single business, large or small, that I have talked to, and I talk to many, who's put corporation tax levels at the top of their wish list. They've raised with me infrastructure, affordable housing for employees to be able to live and work nearby where they work. They've raised education and skills. They've raised the issues of public transport and its affordability too. But this decision alone, and the decision to go ahead with corporation tax cuts at this level, is a self-dug black hole that the government now needs to fill. And they are plugging this gap with the earnings of the self-employed and cutting the amount spent on children's education. In recent weeks and months, teachers have told me about growing parent poverty, about kids coming to school hungry or without clean school uniforms. Parents are unable sometimes to be able to afford those school trips. Schools are having to cut teaching posts and non-teaching welfare and support staff. Curriculum teaching time is being reduced. The school day is being shortened. Combine that with the pressure teachers are facing as school pupil numbers increase, and they are faced with increasing class sizes, and with increasing numbers of children facing mental health conditions who are then unable to get the support that they need. How can the government be proud of this record, which is the reality of what our wonderful schools are facing and the worst that they have known in a generation? The government should indeed delay or abandon their corporation tax cuts and be supporting those schools working hard to make sure that those children of our country get the education they need. And indeed, they should be looking at a minimum, delaying the apprenticeship levy applying to schools. It's also worth a mention, Madam Deputy Speaker, of one other lost opportunity. In his 2015 budget, the former Chancellor announced that he'd hiked the tax take on dividend income by 7.5%. This change only took effect in April 2016, meaning people could bring their dividends forward by a year to avoid it. Once other factors are taken into account, the OBR estimates that pre-announcing this policy cost the Treasury £800 million and handed shareholders that same amount. Each of those individuals withdrew an average of £30 million in dividends and avoided £1.1 million in tax. That's a pretty devastating conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, and another example of how this government has continued to give to those who already have and take away from those who need the most. In closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, we need better than this. We need a strategy that addresses the needs and the challenges of that businesses and families in our constituencies are facing. A proper plan for funding public services, an economic plan that suggests a clear sense of direction, an honest assessment of the risks of Brexit, and a sensible response to those risks. What was missing here, Madam Deputy Speaker, was a proper vision of our future and a pathway for how we get there. It was an unfair budget, it made the wrong choices, and it's set to leave us poorer and less prosperous as a nation.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, after all the spin around this budget, which hasn't exactly gone to plan, let's look at the actual facts. We've seen the worst decade for pay growth in 2 centuries of earnings data, according to the Resolution Foundation. We see GDP growth being overplayed and inflation being